The sound of a single gunshot echoed across the vast expanse of the Fort Irwin firing range, cutting through the Nevada desert air like a razor. It wasn't the thunderous boom of a Barrett 50 cal or the sharp crack of an M4. This sound carried a different signature altogether, a unique resonance that seemed to belong to another era. Thomas Eagle Eye Walker sat perfectly still on a simple wooden stool, his weathered hands resting on his knees. At 82 years old, his posture defied his aged spine, straight as a flagpole, shoulders square. The morning sun cast long shadows across the firing range, illuminating the fine lines on his face, each one a story, a mission, a memory etched by time and experience. The object that drew every eye on the range sat before him on the shooting bench, a rifle meticulously maintained with custom modifications visible to even the untrained observer. But what made jaws drop wasn't its precision engineering or obvious craftsmanship. It was its color. Bright, unmistakable orange like a construction sign or emergency equipment, the kind of color you couldn't miss, couldn't ignore, couldn't forget. A color no serious marksman would ever choose. At the far end of the range, a cluster of young Navy SEALs turned toward the source of the peculiar sound. Their conversation halted mid-sentence as they spotted the old man and his blindingly orange rifle. Eyebrows raised, smirks formed. A few snickers followed. Sergeant Ryan Davis, 27 years old and already a legend in SEAL Team 6 for his marksmanship, took a step forward. His frame was solid muscle under his desert camouflage, his eyes sharp behind ballistic sunglasses. The Mk-13 Mod 7 sniper rifle slung across his back was state-of-the-art, equipped with a Nightforce Atakar 525 by 56mm f1 scope that cost more than some cars. Every inch of his equipment screamed precision, professionalism, and deadly capability. "What the hell is that?" Davis said, loud enough for his team to hear his Boston accent, giving the words an extra edge of contempt. "Someone bring their kid's Nerf gun to the range." The group of SEALs, all crisp haircuts and tactical gear, erupted in laughter. They were the elite of the elite, at the peak of their physical and professional capabilities, carrying the confidence that came with knowing they were the most lethal soldiers on the planet. Walker didn't move, didn't turn, didn't acknowledge the mockery. His eyes remained fixed downrange, where heat shimmered off the baked earth, distorting the distant targets into wavering specters. Davis, emboldened by his team's response and irritated by the old man's indifference, approached Walker's station. His shadow fell across the bench, but still the elderly man didn't look up. "Sir," Davis said, injecting false respect into the word, "this is a restricted military facility. We're conducting advanced SEAL sniper training today." He pointed at the orange rifle. "Whatever that is, it doesn't belong here. It's a distraction and a potential safety hazard." The other SEALs moved closer, forming a loose semicircle behind Davis. One of them, a freckle-faced petty officer named Reynolds, leaned in. "Maybe he thinks it's a water gun, Sarge, for when he gets thirsty out here in the heat." More laughter. Walker remained unmoved, a stone in a river, letting the current of mockery flow around him without effect. Davis's face hardened. The old man's silence felt like a challenge, and Navy SEALs didn't back down from challenges. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to pack up your equipment and leave. This range is for active duty personnel only." For the first time, Walker acknowledged their presence, not by looking at them, but by reaching slowly into the pocket of his faded khaki vest. The motion was deliberate, unhurried. He pulled out a worn leather wallet, and from it extracted a laminated card which he held out without a word. Davis snatched the card, expecting to find some expired veteran's ID or a civilian contractor badge he could dismiss. Instead, he found himself looking at a Pentagon access credential with a bright red border. The clearance level indicated was TSSCI, top secret, sensitive, compartmented information, the highest possible security clearance in the United States government. The signature at the bottom belonged to the current Secretary of Defense. Davis blinked, his confidence wavering for the first time. He turned the card over, checking for signs of forgery, but finding none. The name read Walker Thomas J., and the credentials, to his visible frustration, were all in order. The SEALs behind him sensed the shift. Their smirks faded as they peered over Davis's shoulder at the unexpected identification. "This has to be expired," Davis muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He thrust the card back at Walker. "Or fake. No offense, sir, but you're a bit past the age for active clearance." Walker took the card and returned it to his wallet without comment. His silence was becoming unnerving, a void that Davis felt compelled to fill with more words. Look, regardless of your credentials, we have the range booked for qualification today. We're working with a 2 to 500-meter target setup with multi-million-dollar sensor equipment. It's not a place for, he gestured at the orange rifle, recreational shooting. Walker remained silent, his weathered hands again resting on his knees. The quiet dignity now had an edge to it, a hint of immense gravity, held in check. Reynolds, the young SEAL who'd made the water gun joke, stepped forward and did the unthinkable. He reached out and poked the orange rifle with his finger. "Feels like plastic," he said with a smirk. "What is this, some kind of 3D printed hobby project?" The moment the young SEAL's finger touched the rifle, Walker's eyes changed. For a fraction of a second, the calm, patient gaze of the old man vanished, replaced by something ancient and hard, like flint. The desert sun reflecting off the rifle's scope seemed to flash, and in that instant, Walker wasn't on a shooting range in Nevada anymore. He was in the Sahara Desert, 1954. 11 years old, watching his father, a U.S. intelligence officer, stationed in North Africa during the height of Cold War tensions. The memory was crystal clear. His father crouched behind a ridge exchanging fire with Soviet-backed operatives. The young Walker, hidden in a shallow cave, watched as his father made impossible shots in the fading light, saving their lives. Later that night in their temporary safe house, his father had given him his first BB gun, painted bright orange, so it could be easily found if dropped in the desert sand. "Remember, son," his father had said, voice rough from the desert dust. "The color of a weapon doesn't determine its effectiveness. The person holding it does." Walker blinked, and the memory receded, leaving only the bright Nevada sun and the curious faces of the young SEALs in its place. He hadn't moved, hadn't spoken a word, but something in his demeanor had changed, subtle but undeniable. Across the range, standing near the safety officer's station, a man named John Sullivan watched the scene unfold with growing concern. Sullivan, 59, was a retired Master Chief who now worked as a civilian range safety officer. His time in the Navy had taught him to read people to sense when situations were about to go sideways. This one was headed there fast. It wasn't just the disrespect that bothered him. It was who it was directed at. The old man wasn't a typical hobbyist or weekend shooter. Sullivan had seen him sign in that morning, had noted the name with a vague sense of recognition, but couldn't place it until now. Walker. Thomas J. Walker. Sullivan's mind raced back 20 years to a classified briefing in a windowless room at the Pentagon. A presentation about a covert program called Project Longshot, and the man who had made it all possible, a legend known only by his call sign Desert Phantom. Sullivan looked more closely at the rifle, its orange coloration distinctive and unmistakable. There was only one weapon like that in the world, the prototype that had changed modern sniping forever. The weapon the old-timers called Hellfire Orange. Cold dread settled in Sullivan's stomach as he watched Davis and his team mock the elderly man. These kids had no idea what they were doing. They weren't just disrespecting a veteran. They were poking a sleeping giant. Sullivan pulled his secure phone from his pocket and walked behind the range tower, his back to the unfolding drama. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number for the base's commanding officer, Colonel Richard Adams. This was a massive overstep of his authority as a civilian range officer, a call that could get him fired. But some things were more important than job security. "Colonel Adams's office," came the crisp response. "This is Master Chief Sullivan, retired at the long-range facility," Sullivan said, keeping his voice low. "I need to speak with the colonel immediately. It's urgent." "The colonel is in a meeting, Master Chief. Can I take a message?" Sullivan took a deep breath. "Tell him it's about Thomas Walker, the Desert Phantom. He's here at our range with Hellfire Orange, and he's about to be disrespected by a team of young SEALs who have no idea who they're dealing with." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "Hold, please." Sullivan waited, watching as Davis continued to press Walker, the situation growing more tense by the second. After 30 seconds that felt like an hour, Colonel Adams came on the line, his voice tense. "Sullivan, are you absolutely certain it's Walker, Thomas J. Walker?" "Yes, sir. I verified his credentials myself when he signed in. I didn't make the connection until just now. But it's him, sir, and he has the rifle." "Christ," the colonel muttered. "Who's the SEAL team leader?" "Sergeant Ryan Davis, sir, Team 6 sniper instructor." "Keep them there. I'm calling General Morgan immediately." The line went dead and Sullivan slipped the phone back into his pocket, a sense of grim satisfaction settling over him. The wheels were in motion now. All he could do was watch and wait. Inside the sterile climate-controlled environment of the base command center, Colonel Richard Adams sat at his desk staring at his secure phone with a mixture of disbelief and alarm. He hadn't heard the name Thomas Walker in years. Most people thought he was dead, a ghost from the Cold War era. Adams punched in the direct number for General Patricia Morgan, bypassing her secretary and aide. This wasn't something that could wait or be filtered through proper channels. General Morgan was in the middle of a video conference with NATO officials when her secure line lit up. She glanced at the caller ID, frowned, and excused herself from the meeting. "This had better be important, Richard," she said when she picked up, her voice clipped and professional. "Ma'am, Thomas Walker is at our long-range facility." There was a beat of silence. "Walker is dead," she replied flatly. "Has been for years." "No, ma'am. He's very much alive and sitting at our sniper range right now, with Hellfire Orange." Another pause, longer this time. "You're certain, Mamonin?" Sullivan confirmed it, and he was part of the original long-shot team. "He knows Walker." The general's tone changed, became sharper, more urgent. "Who else is on that range?" "SEAL Team 6 Sniper Training Group under Sergeant Ryan Davis." "Davis?" She repeated the name, her voice now tight with controlled anger. "Young hotshot with the attitude problem." "That's him, ma'am." "Is he giving Walker trouble?" "According to Sullivan, yes." General Morgan's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "I'm on my way. Have my vehicle ready in 2 minutes. And, Richard." "Yes, ma'am." "If those SEALs do anything to disrespect Walker or that rifle before I get there, their careers are over, all of them. Is that clear?" "Crystal clear, ma'am." Back at the range, Davis's patience had finally evaporated. The old man's silent refusal to yield had become a personal insult. The small crowd of SEALs watching had grown larger as word spread across the facility about the standoff. Davis felt his authority, his very identity as a SEAL instructor, being challenged by an octogenarian with a ridiculous orange gun. "All right, that's it," he snapped, his voice cracking with frustration. "I'm done asking nicely. You are creating a distraction and a potential safety hazard. I am ordering you to vacate this firing point immediately." Walker still didn't respond, didn't even look at Davis. "Maybe he's deaf," Reynolds suggested, not quite under his breath. Davis leaned in closer, his face inches from Walker's. "Sir, if you don't comply, I will have you escorted off the base by security. Maybe you're confused. Maybe you forgot where you are. But this is a restricted military facility, not a retirement home shooting club." He took a menacing step forward, reaching for Walker's shoulder, intending to physically usher him away from the bench. He never made it. "Don't." The single word, soft but as hard as steel, stopped Davis in his tracks. It was the first time Walker had spoken, and his voice wasn't what anyone expected. Not the wavering tenor of an elderly man, but the quiet, commanding tone of someone who had spent a lifetime giving orders that were obeyed without question. Davis froze, his hand suspended in midair, inches from Walker's shoulder. Walker slowly turned his head and looked directly at Davis for the first time. His eyes were clear blue, sharp as a hawk's, and utterly unafraid. They were the eyes of a predator, of a man who had seen and done things these young SEALs could only imagine in their worst nightmares. "You don't want to touch me, son," Walker said, his voice still quiet but carrying easily across the now silent range. "And you definitely don't want to touch my rifle." Something in his tone made Davis take an involuntary step back. This wasn't the reaction of a confused old man. This was something else entirely, something that triggered ancient warning signals in Davis's brain. From the back of the group, a voice called out, "Davis, stand down." The SEALs parted as Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez, 45, pushed his way through the crowd. Unlike the younger SEALs, Rodriguez had over 20 years of service with the scars and ribbons to prove it. He was staring at Walker with an expression of dawning recognition. "I know who this is," Rodriguez said, his voice hushed with something like awe. "I've seen his picture in the SEAL team headquarters at Little Creek." He turned to Davis, his face deadly serious. "That's the Thomas Walker, the man who saved SEAL Team 3 in Mogadishu in '93, the Desert Phantom." Davis scoffed, though, with less conviction than before. "That's a myth, Rodriguez, a story they tell new recruits." "It's not a myth if it's real," Rodriguez replied, his eyes never leaving Walker. "And he's sitting right there." The tension in the air was electric, a storm about to break. Davis, his authority challenged his ego. Bruised was about to respond when a new sound cut through the desert air. Engines. Multiple high-performance vehicles approaching at speed. Every head on the range turned toward the main access road. A cloud of dust billowed into the sky, chasing a convoy of vehicles that were closing the distance at an alarming rate. A Humvee led the way, followed by 3 black GMC SUVs with government plates. They weren't just driving, they were charging. The convoy bypassed the main parking area, driving directly onto the graded dirt of the range itself. The vehicle skidded to a halt just yards from where Walker sat, still impassive, still unruffled by the chaos around him. The dust had barely begun to settle when the doors flew open and figures emerged with a disciplined urgency that made the young SEALs look like amateurs by comparison. Security personnel with M4 carbines took up positions around the vehicles, scanning the area with professional detachment. From the lead SUV stepped Colonel Adams, his uniform immaculate despite the hasty departure from his office. But it was the figure who emerged from the second vehicle that caused every jaw in the range to drop. Brigadier General Patricia Morgan, a woman known for her iron will and a combat record that was the stuff of legends, stepped onto the dirt. She wore her dress uniform, her single star gleaming in the desert sun. Her eyes, sharp and intelligent, swept the scene, taking in the arrogant posture of Sergeant Davis, the stunned faces of his men, and finally settling on the seated figure of Thomas Walker. She ignored everyone else. Her stride was powerful and direct as she walked straight toward the old man. The entire range had fallen utterly silent. The only sound was the crunch of her boots on the gravel and the pinging of cooling engines. Sergeant Davis stood frozen, unable to process what was happening. A one-star general had just arrived with a security detail worthy of a visiting head of state, and she was walking directly toward the old man he'd been about to forcibly remove from the range. General Morgan stopped directly in front of Thomas Walker. She didn't speak. Instead, she brought her heels together with a sharp crack, squared her shoulders, and raised her right hand in the crispest, most respectful salute Davis had ever witnessed. It was not the perfunctory salute given to a superior officer out of protocol. It was a salute of profound, almost reverent respect, the kind a warrior gives to a living legend. "Lieutenant Colonel Walker," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying across the silent range. "It is an honor, sir. I apologize for the conduct of these men. They are ignorant of who they are addressing." She held the salute, waiting. Walker slowly, gracefully rose from his stool. He was tall, taller than he had appeared when seated, and he stood with a straightness that defied his years. He gave a slight, acknowledging nod, his eyes softening slightly as they met the general's. Only then did Morgan drop her salute. She turned to face Sergeant Davis, and the warmth in her eyes was replaced by glacial ice. "Sergeant Davis," she began, her voice dangerously quiet, "do you have any idea who this man is?" Davis, pale and trembling, could only stammer, "No, ma'am, he's a civilian, Sam." "A civilian," General Morgan let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sergeant, you and your men are breathing air you haven't earned standing on ground you don't deserve in the presence of a man who built the very foundation of the skills you claim to have mastered." She gestured toward Walker with a reverence that was palpable. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Walker, retired. For those of you too young or too ignorant to know, let me educate you." She paused, letting her gaze sweep over the assembled SEALs, all now standing at rigid attention. "This man holds the highest civilian award for valor our country can bestow. Before that, he served in places your redacted mission reports don't have names for. He holds 5 confirmed kills at over 500 yards, a record that stood for nearly 4 decades. She took a step toward Walker's shooting bench and rested her hand near the orange rifle, careful not to touch it. "And this toy you were so quick to mock. This is Hellfire Orange, the prototype that led to the development of the M40A6 sniper system you're currently qualified on, Sergeant. Except this one is better. He built it in a forward operating base with salvaged parts during the first Gulf War." Her voice dropped, becoming almost reverential. "That bright orange paint you find so amusing. That was so medevac helicopters could spot his position when he was extracted after spending 72 hours holding off an entire enemy battalion alone, protecting a downed pilot." She looked directly at Davis. "That color saved his life and the life of that pilot who, I might add, went on to become the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff." The silence on the range was now absolute thick with shame and awe. Sergeant Davis looked as if he wanted the ground to swallow him whole. His fellow SEALs who had been laughing and joking just minutes before stared at their boots, their faces burning with humiliation. General Morgan turned back to Davis, her voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You did not see a veteran. You saw an old man. You did not see a piece of history. You saw a toy. You saw weakness where you should have seen unimaginable strength. She pointed a single trembling finger at him. You and your entire squad will report to my office at 0600 tomorrow for a personal lesson in military history and professional courtesy. It's a lesson you will not soon forget. As the general's words hung in the air, Thomas Walker finally spoke again. His voice was not loud, but it had a quiet authority that commanded even more attention than the general's anger. General Morgan, he said calmly, they're young, they're proud. It's a good thing, they just need to learn where to point it. He turned his gaze to Sergeant Davis. There was no anger in his eyes, only a profound, weary wisdom. Your job isn't to be the strongest son, it's to respect the strength that came before you. Humility is a heavier burden than any rucksack, and it's the one that will carry you the furthest. Walker patted the stock of the orange rifle. As he did another flash of memory, sharper this time. He was in the Saudi Desert 1991, Operation Desert Storm. He was younger then, but still a veteran, his hands steady and sure as he modified the receiver of what would become Hellfire Orange. The pilot whose leg he had just set and splinted was lying nearby, feverish from infection. Why Orange Walker? The pilot had mumbled through pain-clenched teeth. Walker hadn't looked up from his work. Because I only plan on making one shot, he had replied. After that, I want to be easy to find, one way or another. It was a testament to a kind of focused courage that was beyond the comprehension of the young men standing before him. He was a man who had built a beacon for his own rescue or his own demise, and all hinging on the success of a single impossible shot. Walker looked up at General Morgan, a silent understanding passing between them. Then, to everyone's surprise, he turned to Sergeant Davis. You're good at what you do. I can see it in how you carry yourself, how you handle your weapon. But being good isn't enough. Not in our line of work. Davis swallowed hard, unable to meet Walker's gaze. The difference between a good shot and a great one isn't in the rifle or the scope or even the training, Walker continued. It's in understanding that every round you fire carries your signature, your ethics, your responsibility. He gestured to the orange rifle. This isn't just a weapon, it's a statement. It says I don't need to hide, I don't need camouflage or tactical advantage. I can make the shot from so far away that you'll never see me coming, orange rifle or not. Walker's eyes held Davis's for a long moment. I'd be willing to prove it if you are interested. The challenge hung in the air, clear and unmistakable. General Morgan raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you proposing, Colonel? Walker smiled, for the first time, a slight upturn of his lips that transformed his weathered face. A demonstration, Sergeant Davis and I, one shot each at 3,000 meters. A murmur ran through the crowd. 3,000 meters, nearly 2 miles, was beyond the effective range of even the most advanced sniper systems. It was considered theoretically possible, but practically impossible under field conditions. Davis found his voice at last. Sir, with all due respect, 3,000 meters is beyond the capability of any man or weapon system. The variables, the Coriolis effect alone, at that distance, Walker's smile grew slightly. Nothing is impossible, Sergeant. Only unproven. General Morgan studied Walker's face for a moment, then nodded decisively. 1 week from today, we'll set up the range specifically for this demonstration. She turned to Davis. Consider it part of your education, Sergeant. Davis straightened to attention. Yes, ma'am. As the general began issuing orders to her staff and the crowd slowly dispersed, Chief Rodriguez stepped closer to Davis. You have no idea what you've just gotten yourself into, he said quietly. I suggest you spend the next week in the library reading everything you can find about Project Longshot and the Hellfire Protocol. Davis watched as Walker carefully packed up his orange's rifle, his movements precise and economical. Who is he really? Davis asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Rodriguez shook his head. A ghost, a legend. The man who invented half the techniques you teach without even knowing it. He clapped Davis on the shoulder. And now your new teacher. Pay attention, because this is the kind of lesson that comes once in a lifetime. As Walker prepared to leave with General Morgan, he paused and looked back at the young SEALs, his gaze lingering on Davis. 1 week, Sergeant. Bring your best. I know I will. With that, he turned and walked toward the waiting vehicles, his posture unbowed by age or the weight of his legend. The orange rifle case slung over his shoulder caught the sun, a beacon of defiance against the drab desert backdrop. Davis watched him go, a strange mixture of dread and anticipation settling in his gut. In one morning, his world had been turned upside down, his confidence shaken, his assumptions challenged. And in 1 week, he would face the Desert Phantom in a test that would either make or break his career, his reputation, and perhaps most importantly, his understanding of what it truly meant to be a warrior. The legend of the ghost and his orange rifle was no longer a story from the past. It was a living, breathing reality he was about to face head-on. The morning after the confrontation at the range, the Nevada desert awoke to the sound of military vehicles rumbling across its ancient surface. The sun hadn't yet crested the eastern mountains, but already a convoy of Humvees and transport trucks made its way toward Fort Irwin's command headquarters. Inside the lead vehicle sat Sergeant Ryan Davis, his face a mask of stone, his thoughts churning like storm clouds. At precisely 0600 hours, Davis and his SEAL team stood at rigid attention in General Morgan's office. The room was austere, adorned only with flag service medals and a single photograph on the wall that Davis couldn't help but notice. It showed a much younger Patricia Morgan standing next to a middle-aged Thomas Walker. Behind them, a desert landscape that could only be Saudi Arabia during Operation Desert Storm, and both were covered in dust and what looked like dried blood. Morgan's leg was bandaged, and Walker held the unmistakable orange rifle. General Morgan entered without ceremony, her uniform pressed to knife-edge perfection, her single star gleaming under the fluorescent lights. She didn't sit. Instead, she circled the men slowly like a predator, sizing up prey. "Gentlemen," she began, her voice controlled, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Yesterday you embarrassed yourselves, your unit, and the entire United States military. Today you begin making amends." She stopped in front of Davis, her eyes boring into his. "You pride yourselves on being the best of the best, on knowing your weapons, your tactics, your history. Yet you failed to recognize the man who wrote half the manual you learned from." She turned and walked to her desk, lifting a thick red folder stamped with "Top Secret" in bold letters. "Project Longshot, clearance level TSSCI. I've received special dispensation from the Secretary of Defense to share certain details with you. Consider it required reading." The general slid the folder across the desk toward Davis. "You have 1 week, Sergeant. 1 week to understand who Thomas Walker is and what that orange rifle represents before you face him in the demonstration. I suggest you use that time wisely." Davis swallowed hard. "Yes, ma'am." "Dismissed, except you, Davis. A word in private." As the other SEALs filed out, Davis remained at attention, his face betraying nothing of the anxiety churning in his gut. When the door closed, General Morgan's demeanor shifted subtly. "At ease, Sergeant." She gestured to a chair. "Sit." Davis sat stiffly, hands on his knees, back straight. "I'm going to tell you something that isn't in that file." Morgan said, her voice softer now, almost conversational. She turned and looked at the photograph on the wall. "That picture was taken in 1991 during Desert Storm. I was a young lieutenant, part of a forward reconnaissance unit. We were compromised, surrounded by Republican Guard. I took a bullet through my thigh." She paused, her eyes distant with memory. Walker appeared out of nowhere. One man with that ridiculous orange rifle. He held off an entire company for 18 hours until extraction arrived. Killed the enemy commander with a shot that, by all laws of physics and ballistics, should have been impossible. Morgan turned back to Davis, her expression grave. "He saved my life that day, and the lives of every soldier in my unit." When I asked him why he painted his rifle orange, do you know what he said? Davis shook his head silently. He said, "Fear hides in shadows, Lieutenant." "I don't." Morgan let the words hang in the air. "That's the man you mocked yesterday, Davis. That's the man you'll face in 1 week. Davis felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. "I understand, ma'am." "No, you don't. Not yet." Morgan leaned forward. "But you will. This isn't punishment, Davis. It's education, the most valuable kind. Now go. You have work to do." As Davis left the general's office, the red folder heavy in his hands, he caught sight of Chief Rodriguez waiting in the corridor. The general asked me to be your guide through that material, Rodriguez said, nodding at the folder. I worked with Walker in Somalia. There's things about him that aren't in any file. Together they walked to a secure briefing room where Davis opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside was the history of a ghost, a legend made flesh. Page after page of mission reports, ballistic data, and photographs spanning decades of service that officially never happened. The black and white image on the first page showed a younger Walker, perhaps in his late 40s, standing in what appeared to be a makeshift workshop. His hands were working on the first iteration of what would become the Orange Rifle. The date stamp read January 17, 1991, Saudi Arabia. This is where it began, Rodriguez said quietly. Operation Desert Storm. Walker was already a legend by then, but what he did there changed the game forever. Davis spent the next hours absorbed in the file, learning about a man who had operated in shadows for decades, who had pushed the boundaries of what was possible with a rifle, who had saved countless lives with impossible shots. A man who had been written off as dead or retired countless times only to reappear when the need was greatest. Meanwhile, across the base in a secluded VIP guest quarters, Thomas Walker sat at a simple desk, field-stripping Hellfire Orange, with the practiced ease of a man who knew every pin spring and screw like extensions of his own fingers. The rifle, despite its garish color, was a marvel of engineering, a hybrid of military precision and improvised genius. A knock at the door interrupted his work. "Enter," Walker called, not looking up from his task. General Morgan stepped into the room, now dressed in casual BDUs rather than her formal uniform. "You always did know how to make an entrance, Tom." Walker's weathered face cracked into a small smile. "Not as good as yours, Patty, a general with a security detail. Very dramatic." Morgan chuckled, pulling up a chair opposite him. "Had to make an impression on those boys. They needed the shock. Particularly your Sergeant Davis." Walker's hands continued their mechanical dance, reassembling the rifle with fluid precision. "He reminds me of someone." "Don't you dare say me," Morgan warned with mock severity. "The thought never crossed my mind." Walker's eyes twinkled with mischief that belied his years. "Though the same stubbornness is there. The same fire." Morgan watched his hands work, mesmerized by the efficiency of movement that age had not diminished. "Are you sure about this demonstration, Tom? 3,000 meters is pushing it even for you." Walker locked the bolt carrier back into place with a satisfying click. "Nothing worth doing is easy, Patty. You taught me that, remember? I think it was the other way around." She leaned back, studying her old friend and mentor. "The Joint Chiefs are coming. SecDef might make an appearance too. Word travels fast when the Desert Phantom returns from the dead." Walker shrugged, unconcerned by the prospect of a high-level audience. "Let them come. This isn't about putting on a show. It's about teaching a lesson." "And what lesson is that exactly?" Walker finally looked up, his blue eyes clear and piercing. "That some things can't be measured by equipment or technology. That the most powerful weapon isn't the one in your hands, but the one in your mind." He gestured to the Orange Rifle. "This was never about the hardware, Patty. It was about making them believe it was impossible, then doing it anyway." Morgan nodded slowly. "You're going to attempt a shot that defies the ballistic tables, aren't you?" Walker's smile was enigmatic. "I'm going to show them what's possible when you stop listening to what everyone says can't be done." As the week progressed, Davis immersed himself in the long-shot files, learning about operations that spanned the globe, shots that had changed the course of history, innovations that had transformed modern sniping. But it was the personal notes, the after-action reports written in Walker's own hand, that affected him most deeply. From the secure archive room, Davis called his wife, his voice hushed with something like reverence. "Sarah, I can't explain it all now, but I was wrong about something. Really wrong." "That's not like you to admit," she teased gently. "Must be serious." "It is. This man Walker, the things he's done, the lives he's saved, and I treated him like..." "Like what?" Davis swallowed hard. "Like he was nothing, just an old man in my way." There was a pause on the line. "So what are you going to do about it?" "Learn," Davis said simply. "Learn everything I can." And learn he did. Day and night, Davis pored over the files, spoke with veterans who had encountered Walker, studied the ballistic innovations that had come from Project Longshot. He visited the base library searching for additional information on the historical operations mentioned in the classified files. On the third day, he found himself in the technical section surrounded by books on advanced ballistics when a shadow fell across his table. "Mind if I join you?" Davis looked up to find Thomas Walker standing there, a stack of books in his arms. The old man's presence was so unexpected that Davis nearly knocked over his coffee in his haste to stand. "Sir, of course, please." Walker set his books down and took a seat with the easy grace of a man half his age. "At ease, Sergeant. We're in a library, not a parade ground." Davis sat awkwardly, unsure what to do or say in the presence of the man he'd spent days reading about, the man he'd disrespected so thoroughly. "Sir, I want to apologize for—" Walker held up a hand, stopping him. "Already forgotten, Sergeant. What matters is what we learn from our mistakes, not the mistakes themselves." He gestured to the books spread across the table. "Advanced ballistic compensation at extreme ranges. Good choice. Though you might want to add thermodynamic effects on projectile stability. The chapter on heat mirage is particularly relevant for desert conditions." Davis nodded, making a note. An uncomfortable silence stretched between them. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Davis finally asked. Walker raised an eyebrow. "We're not in the chain of command, Sergeant. You don't need permission." "Why orange?" The question had been burning in Davis's mind for days. "I understand the rescue visibility aspect, but why keep it that color for all these years?" Walker considered the question, his weathered hands folded on the table. "Have you ever noticed how people react to it the first time they see it?" "They laugh," Davis admitted. "They don't take it seriously." "Exactly," Walker's blue eyes gleamed. "And in that moment of dismissal, I've already won. They've underestimated me, which is the greatest tactical advantage you can have." He leaned forward slightly. "But it's more than that. The orange is a reminder to myself more than anyone. A reminder that the purpose of a shot isn't to kill, it's to protect, to save. The orange reminds me that after I pull the trigger, my job becomes making sure the people I'm protecting get home safe." Walker tapped one of the books. "These will teach you the mathematics, the physics, the environmental factors. All essential knowledge. But they won't teach you the most important aspect of long-distance shooting." "Which is?" Davis asked, genuinely curious. "Intention," Walker said simply. "Why you're taking the shot matters as much as how. The best snipers I've known aren't the ones who can recite ballistic tables from memory. They're the ones who understand that each bullet carries a purpose greater than themselves." Davis nodded slowly, beginning to understand. "Like your shot in Desert Storm, saving General Morgan's unit." Walker's eyes narrowed slightly. "You've been reading my file." "Yes, sir. It's remarkable. It's classified, Sergeant. TS SCI. General Morgan gave me clearance for the demonstration." Walker studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "What else did you learn from my file?" Davis thought carefully before answering. "That you have made impossible shots before, multiple times, in conditions that should have made them physically impossible according to standard ballistic calculations." "And what does that tell you?" "That either the laws of physics make exceptions for Thomas Walker," Davis said with a small smile, "or there's something you know that isn't in the standard manuals." Walker's face creased into a genuine smile. "Now you're asking the right questions, Sergeant." He stood up, gathering his books. "I'll see you at the demonstration, Davis. Remember what we discussed about intention." As Walker walked away, Davis felt something shift inside him. The dread of embarrassment had been replaced by something else, a hunger to understand, to learn, to earn the respect of this remarkable man. The day before the demonstration, Davis visited the range early, wanting to familiarize himself with the conditions. To his surprise, he found Walker already there, sitting on his wooden stool, gazing out at the 3,000-meter target zone that had been specially prepared. "Good morning, sir," Davis said, approaching cautiously. Walker nodded in greeting. "Beautiful day for impossible things, isn't it?" Davis looked out at the desert landscape, shimmering already with the morning heat. "Sir, I've been running the numbers. At 3,000 meters with these temperature gradients and wind conditions, it's not just difficult, it's impossible," Walker finished for him. "By conventional calculations, yes." "Then how—" "Sit," Walker gestured to a spot beside him. When Davis complied, Walker pointed out toward the distant target zone. "What do you see?" Davis squinted. "Heat waves, wind patterns in the dust. The target stands." Look deeper, Walker urged. See the air currents, the way the heat rises in columns, the rhythm of the wind as it moves across the terrain. Davis tried to see what Walker was describing, but it all looked like random patterns to him. I don't understand. The desert breathes, Sergeant. It has rhythms patterns. Most shooters try to calculate their way through these variables, but at extreme distances, calculations can only take you so far. Walker's voice took on a teaching quality, patient and measured. There comes a point where you have to stop thinking of air as an obstacle and start seeing it as a medium, like water. You wouldn't try to calculate the exact force needed to push a boat through ocean waves. You'd feel the rhythm of the swells and work with them. Davis listened intently, beginning to grasp what Walker was explaining. You're saying at extreme distances, it becomes more intuitive than mathematical. Exactly. Walker nodded approvingly. The math gets you close, but that last critical adjustment, the one that means the difference between a miss and a hit at 3,000 meters, that comes from here. He tapped his temple. And here. He placed a hand over his heart. Feel the shot before you take it. See the bullet's path not as a calculated trajectory, but as a living thing influenced by everything it passes through. Davis nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning. Is that what Project Longshot was really about? Not just advanced ballistics, but a different way of approaching long-distance shooting altogether. Walker smiled, pleased by Davis's insight. Now you're getting it. Longshot wasn't about building better rifles or calculating more precise trajectories. It was about developing a methodology that transcended conventional limitations. He gestured towards the orange rifle case leaning against his stool. Hellfire Orange isn't special because of its components, though they are exceptional. It's special because it was built with this philosophy at its core. The two men sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching the desert wind stir the dust in ethereal patterns. Tomorrow, Walker said finally, don't try to outshoot me, Sergeant. That's not the point of this demonstration. Try to understand what I'm showing you. That's worth far more than bragging rights or wounded pride. Davis nodded, a new respect evident in his bearing. I will, sir. Thank you. As the sun climbed higher, they parted ways, each man preparing in his own fashion for the challenge that awaited them. Davis returned to his quarters, his mind spinning with new concepts and approaches that contradicted much of his formal training. That evening, a special transport plane touched down at the Fort Irwin airstrip, delivering high-ranking officers from the Pentagon, including the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, and as rumored, the Secretary of Defense himself. The demonstration had evolved from a teaching moment into a high-profile military event. In his quarters, Davis cleaned his Mk-13 Mod 7, meticulously checking every component, running through the ballistic calculations for the 1,000th time. Despite his best efforts, the numbers kept telling him the same thing: a shot at 3,000 meters, with the predicted wind conditions and temperature gradients, had a probability of success so low it was essentially zero. Yet Walker seemed utterly confident. Not cocky, not boastful, but possessed of a serene certainty that transcended normal confidence. It was the assurance of a man who had done the impossible so many times that it had become routine. Across the base, Walker sat alone in his temporary quarters, his hands moving through a series of meditative exercises that looked like Tai Chi but were far more specialized. Each movement corresponded to a breath, each breath to a heartbeat, calibrating his body's rhythms to the task ahead. On his desk sat a small, worn photograph of a young man in Air Force dress blues, the pilot he had saved in Desert Storm, who had indeed gone on to become chairman of the Joint Chiefs. Next to it lay a simple orange poker chip, a talisman he had carried through countless missions. Walker wasn't preparing for a demonstration. In his mind, he was preparing for a mission, one with stakes just as high as any he had undertaken in his long career. Because tomorrow wasn't about proving his skill or embarrassing a young SEAL. It was about passing on a legacy, about ensuring that what he had learned through decades of service wouldn't die with him. Dawn broke over Fort Irwin with a spectacular display of color that turned the desert into a canvas of reds, oranges, and golds. By 0700, the range was a hive of activity. Technical crews set up sophisticated monitoring equipment to track the shots. Medical personnel stood by as a precaution. Security details established a perimeter around the VIP viewing area. At 800 sharp, the VIPs arrived. The Secretary of Defense, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs General, admirals, and high-ranking officials from every branch of service. They took their places in the climate-controlled observation post with monitors showing live feeds from cameras positioned along the 3,000-meter range. At 0830, Davis arrived wearing his desert camouflage uniform, his Mk-13 Mod 7 rifle case in hand. He nodded respectfully to the assembled officials and took his position at the firing line. His equipment was state-of-the-art, the best scope money could buy, a custom-tuned trigger-match-grade ammunition hand-loaded to exacting specifications. At 0845, a murmur ran through the crowd as Thomas Walker appeared. He wore no uniform, only tan tactical pants and a faded olive shirt that had seen better days. Slung over his shoulder was the orange rifle case that had become the stuff of legend. Despite his age and civilian attire, he moved with the purposeful grace of a natural predator. General Morgan stepped forward to address the assembled crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending this special demonstration. Today you will witness an attempt at a 3,000-meter precision shot, a distance that pushes the boundaries of what is considered possible with current technology and methodology. She gestured to the two men. Sergeant Ryan Davis, SEAL Team 6 sniper instructor using the Mk-13 Mod 7 precision rifle system, and Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Walker, retired, using, well, I'll let his results speak for themselves. A polite chuckle rippled through the audience. Morgan continued, each shooter will have one shot. The target is a standard 20-inch diameter steel plate at exactly 3,000 meters. Wind conditions are variable, currently 8 to 12 miles per hour from the southwest, with gusts to 15. Temperature is 92 degrees Fahrenheit and rising with significant heat mirage conditions. She turned to the shooters. Sergeant Davis will fire first, followed by Colonel Walker. Gentlemen, prepare your weapons. Davis knelt and opened his case, revealing the precision instrument within. Each component had been selected for maximum accuracy and reliability. He assembled it with practiced efficiency, mounting the scope, checking the action, loading a single round of custom ammunition. Beside him, Walker moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had performed this ritual thousands of times. He opened the orange case to reveal Hellfire Orange in all its incongruous glory. The rifle was a hybrid creation, part military precision instrument, part custom innovation. Its orange stock and forearms seemed to glow in the morning sun, a beacon of defiance against conventional wisdom. Davis couldn't help but watch as Walker prepared his weapon. There was something almost ceremonial in his movements, a reverence that spoke of the deep bond between man and machine. When both men were ready, General Morgan spoke again. Shooters, you may begin your ranging and calculations. You will fire on my command. Davis took his position lying prone behind his rifle. He activated his ballistic computer, inputting the distance, atmospheric conditions, wind speed, and a dozen other variables. The device calculated a firing solution that required a substantial holdover and windage adjustment. Davis dialed in the corrections on his scope, his face a mask of concentration. Walker, by contrast, simply sat on his stool rifle across his knees, eyes closed. He appeared to be meditating or perhaps praying. The VIPs exchanged glances, some skeptical, others curious. After several minutes, Davis called out, "Ready?" Walker opened his eyes, nodded once, and said softly, "Ready." General Morgan raised her hand. "Sergeant Davis, you may fire when ready." Davis took a deep breath, settled into his position, and began his shot routine. He controlled his breathing, finding the natural respiratory pause. His finger took up the slack in the trigger. The crosshairs settled on the distant target, adjusted for the massive bullet drop at this extreme range. He squeezed the trigger. The rifle cracked, the sound echoing across the desert. Through his scope, Davis watched the impact point, praying for a hit, but knowing the odds were astronomically against him. The spotters called it immediately. "Miss, 1.2 meters right of target." A respectable result at such an extreme distance, but still a clear miss. Davis exhaled slowly, accepting the outcome. He had known the probability of success was minimal. No one had expected him to hit. General Morgan nodded. "Thank you, Sergeant Davis. A commendable attempt at a nearly impossible distance." She turned to Walker. "Colonel Walker, you may fire when ready." Walker finally stood, moving to his position with the fluid grace of a much younger man. Unlike Davis, he did not lie prone. Instead, he sat cross-legged, the rifle resting on a simple sandbag support. The position was unorthodox, almost casual, drawing murmurs from the observers. He made no adjustments to his scope, performed no last-minute calculations, simply settled the rifle against his shoulder, his posture relaxed yet perfectly aligned. For nearly a full minute, Walker remained motionless, his breathing so shallow it was barely perceptible. His focus was absolute. His awareness expanded to encompass not just the target, but everything between himself and it, every air current, every thermal, every dust devil dancing across the 3 kilometers of desert. Then, without warning, he fired. The orange rifle's report was different from Davis's, deeper, more resonant somehow. The assembled officials held their breath, all eyes on the monitors showing the distant target. 4 seconds passed, 4 heartbeats that felt like an eternity. Then the spotters' voices, incredulous, hit dead center. The viewing area erupted in astonishment. Officials who had seen everything in their long careers stood in disbelief. The Secretary of Defense turned to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, his expression thunderstruck. Is that even possible? The chairman, who owed his life to Walker's impossible shot decades earlier, simply smiled. With Walker, the word impossible doesn't apply. Davis stared through his spotter's scope, unable to believe what he had just witnessed. By every calculation, by every known principle of external ballistics, that shot should not have connected. Yet the evidence was undeniable. A perfect hit at 3,000 meters. Walker calmly lowered his rifle, his expression unchanged, as if he had done nothing more remarkable than mail a letter. He began to clean his weapon with the same methodical care he always showed. General Morgan approached him, unable to contain her smile. Still defying physics after all these years, Tom? Walker shrugged. Physics and I have an understanding. I respect its boundaries, and occasionally it lets me bend them a little. The crowd was moving toward them now. Officials eager to congratulate Walker, to examine the orange rifle, to understand how he had accomplished the seemingly impossible. Davis hung back, a complex mixture of emotions churning within him. Humiliation, yes, but also awe, respect, and a burning curiosity. He had just witnessed something that contradicted everything he thought he knew about long-distance shooting. As the officials surrounded Walker, peppering him with questions, the old sniper's eyes found Davis over the crowd. With a subtle gesture, he beckoned the young SEAL to join them. Davis approached hesitantly, expecting to be held up as a counterpoint to Walker's brilliance, the young hotshot who had been put in his place. Instead, Walker did something unexpected. Ladies and gentlemen, Walker addressed the group, his quiet voice somehow carrying over the excited chatter. What you just witnessed wasn't magic or some secret technology. It was the application of principles that can be taught, learned, and mastered. He placed a hand on Davis's shoulder. Sergeant Davis here has the potential to surpass anything I've accomplished. What he needs isn't better equipment or more advanced calculations. What he needs is a different perspective, a different approach to the art of precision shooting at extreme distances. The Secretary of Defense stepped forward. Colonel Walker, are you saying this methodology could be taught to our current sniper corps? Walker nodded. With the right foundation, yes. It requires unlearning as much as learning, but the principles are universal. The Secretary exchanged glances with the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who nodded almost imperceptibly. We would be very interested in discussing the possibility of you consulting on a training program, Colonel, if you're willing. Walker seemed to consider this for a moment, then looked at Davis. I might be under one condition. Name it, the Secretary replied immediately. That Sergeant Davis here be assigned as my liaison and eventual successor for the program. He's already halfway to understanding what took me decades to develop. Davis stared at Walker in shock. After their initial confrontation, after the humiliation of today's demonstration, the last thing he had expected was to be singled out for such an honor. The Secretary looked to General Morgan, who nodded her approval. I think that can be arranged, Colonel. We'll have the paperwork drawn up immediately. As the officials moved off to discuss logistics, Davis found himself alone with Walker. Sir, I don't understand. Why me, after how I treated you after I failed today? Walker's weathered face creased into a genuine smile. You didn't fail, Sergeant. You performed exactly as expected, given your training and equipment. The fact that you came as close as you did shows exceptional skill. He gestured toward the distant target. But more importantly, I saw how you watched me. Not with resentment or disbelief, but with a genuine desire to understand. That's the quality I'm looking for. Not ego, not blind adherence to doctrine, but an open mind. Davis shook his head, still processing the unexpected turn of events. I don't know what to say, sir. Say you'll learn, Walker replied simply. Say you'll keep an open mind and question everything you think you know about long-distance shooting. I will, sir, I promise. Walker nodded, satisfied. Good. Then our work begins tomorrow. 0600 at the range. Bring your rifle and an empty notebook. You're going to need it. As Walker walked away to speak with General, Morgan Davis stood alone on the firing line, looking out at the impossible distance that separated him from the target. 3,000 meters of physics, mathematics, and environmental variables that he had been taught were insurmountable. Yet Walker had conquered them with a single shot. Not through superior technology or equipment, but through a fundamentally different understanding of the relationship between shooter-weapon bullet and environment. For the first time in his career, Davis felt like a beginner, again standing at the threshold of an entirely new approach to his craft. The humbling experience of the past week culminating in today's demonstration had stripped away his arrogance and replaced it with something far more valuable: the hunger to learn, to understand, to master what Walker had to teach. As the desert wind kicked up around him, Davis made a silent promise to himself. He would earn Walker's respect. He would honor the legacy of the Desert Phantom. And someday perhaps he would make his own impossible shot with the confidence and serenity that Walker had displayed. The orange rifle had taught him his first and most important lesson. True mastery begins with humility. In the VIP viewing area, the Secretary of Defense watched Walker with undisguised admiration. He's a national treasure, he said quietly to General Morgan. All these years, and he can still do things that our best technology can't explain. Morgan nodded. That's why we need him to teach others, sir, before his knowledge is lost. Do you think it can be taught, or is Walker simply unique? Morgan considered the question carefully. Both, I think. The principles can be taught, but there's something about Walker, a quality that can't be quantified or explained. A connection to his environment, an intuition that borders on the supernatural. She watched as Walker packed up the orange rifle with reverent care. But even if we can capture just a fraction of his methodology, it would revolutionize our approach to long-distance precision shooting. The secretary nodded. Make it happen, General. Whatever resources you need. 6 months passed like a desert wind across Fort Irwin. What had begun as a demonstration of impossible marksmanship had evolved into something far more significant. Project Phoenix, the most advanced long-range shooting program in military history. The sprawling facility built specifically for the program stood apart from the main base, a complex of ranges classrooms and environmental simulation chambers. At its heart was a simple wooden structure that looked out of place among the modern buildings, a replica of the forward operating base workshop where Walker had first built Hellfire Orange. Inside this humble building, Thomas Walker stood before a group of 12 elite snipers from across all branches of the military. At the front of the class, closest to Walker, sat Sergeant Ryan Davis, now appointed as Deputy Program Director. The transformation in Davis over the past months was remarkable. The cocky, by-the-book SEAL had become a thoughtful student, his former arrogance replaced by genuine humility and an insatiable hunger to learn. Gentlemen, Walker began, his voice quiet but carrying easily through the room. Today marks the culmination of your training. 6 months ago, you arrived here as the best snipers in the American military. You came with medals, with confirmed kills at distances your peers consider impressive. You came with confidence in your abilities and your equipment. He paused, his weathered hands resting on the podium. And then we stripped it all away. We made you question everything you thought you knew about long-range shooting. We taught you to feel the wind rather than just measure it, to see air not as an obstacle, but as a medium. To understand that the path of a bullet is not just a calculation, but a relationship between you, your weapon, and the world between you and your target. Walker stepped away from the podium, moving toward a wall where 12 orange rifle cases were mounted. Each bore the name of a student in the program. Today, you will demonstrate what you've learned, not with impossible shots to impress an audience, but with the kind of shots that save lives in the field, because that's what this has always been about. Davis stood and joined Walker at the wall of rifles. The final exercise will take place across 3 different environmental zones, he explained: desert, mountain, and urban. You'll be given mission parameters that mirror real-world scenarios, time constraints, limited intelligence, and environmental challenges that can't be solved by ballistic computers alone. Walker nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes as he watched Davis explain the exercise. The young SEAL had not only embraced Walker's methodology, but had begun to develop innovations of his own, blending traditional training with the more intuitive approach Walker had pioneered. Before we begin, Walker said, turning back to the class, I want to share something with you. Something I've never told anyone except Sergeant Davis. The room fell silent, the students leaning forward unconsciously. The orange color of these rifles isn't just for visibility during rescue operations, though that's what the official records state. Walker ran his hand along one of the cases. It's a reminder that what we do isn't about hiding in shadows or dealing death from darkness. It's about standing in the light, taking responsibility for each shot we take, for each life we affect. He looked around the room, making eye contact with each student. In ancient warrior traditions, a weapon was never concealed when its purpose was just. Only assassins and those with dishonorable intentions hid their weapons. The orange declares our purpose openly. We are here not to ambush, not to murder, but to protect. Walker opened one of the cases, revealing the distinctive orange rifle within. When you fire these weapons, you carry that responsibility with you. The responsibility to ensure that each shot serves the greater good, that it protects those who cannot protect themselves. As the students collected their rifles and prepared for the final exercise, Davis remained behind with Walker for a moment. They're ready, Davis said quietly. The best class we've had so far. Walker nodded. They've learned the techniques well, but have they understood the philosophy? We'll see today, Davis replied. The scenarios are designed to test judgment as much as marksmanship. Walker smiled, placing a hand on Davis's shoulder. You've done well, Ryan. Better than I could have hoped. Davis looked momentarily embarrassed by the praise. I had a good teacher. You had an old man with an orange rifle and some unconventional ideas. Walker corrected with a hint of humor. You took those ideas and built something that will outlast both of us. Together they walked outside where the 12 students were preparing their equipment. The transformation in these elite snipers was evident not just in their technical skills, but in their demeanor, the quiet confidence that comes from true mastery rather than mere proficiency. As the final exercise began, General Morgan arrived to observe. She stood beside Walker on a hillside overlooking the exercise grounds, watching as the students navigated the complex scenarios. The Joint Chiefs are impressed with the results, she said after a while. The field reports from the first graduates have been exceptional. Shots that would have been considered impossible a year ago are now becoming standard for Phoenix graduates. Walker nodded, watching through binoculars as one of the students set up in an urban environment simulation, preparing for a shot through multiple glass barriers, a scenario based on one of Walker's own missions in Panama. It's not about the shots, Patty, he said. It's about the decisions. When to take them, when to hold back. That's what separates a true master from a mere technician. Morgan studied her old friend's profile. At 82, Thomas Walker still stood straight, his eyes still sharp, but she could see the toll the intensive teaching schedule had taken on him. The Secretary of Defense wants to name the program after you, she said. Officially change it from Phoenix to Walker. The old sniper shook his head firmly. No, this isn't about me or my legacy. It's about the future, about what these young men and women will do with what they've learned. Always the humble one, Morgan said with a smile. Some things never change. Some things shouldn't, Walker replied, turning his attention back to the exercise. In the urban scenario, the student had made his shot, a perfect hit through 3 layers of glass at 200 meters, accounting for the refraction through each barrier. Walker nodded in approval. He remembered to feel the glass, not just calculate for it, he observed. Good. As the day progressed, each student demonstrated mastery of the techniques Walker had taught them. But it was in the mountain scenario that the true test came, a situation designed not to test marksmanship but judgment. The scenario presented a target that appeared to be a high-value enemy combatant but was positioned near civilians. The wind conditions were extreme, and the shot, while technically possible, carried significant risk. One by one, the students came to the same conclusion: hold fire, wait for a better opportunity, protect the innocent at all costs. Walker watched with quiet satisfaction. They understood, he said softly to Morgan. That's what matters most. As the exercise concluded, the students gathered back at the main facility, their faces showing the mixture of exhaustion and accomplishment that comes from successfully completing a grueling challenge. Walker addressed them one final time. Today, you've proven not just your skill, but your understanding. You've shown that you grasp the true purpose of what we do, not to take life when necessary, but to preserve it whenever possible. He gestured to Davis. Sergeant Davis will continue your training. There is still much to learn, refinements to be made, skills to be honed. But you have crossed the threshold from technicians to artists, from shooters to true snipers. Walker looked at each of them in turn. Remember what these orange rifles represent. Carry that responsibility with you wherever you go. And know that the true measure of your success will never be the targets you hit, but the lives you save. With that, Walker stepped back, allowing Davis to take over the debriefing. As the students filed out, Walker remained behind, suddenly feeling every one of his 82 years. The 6 months of intensive teaching had drained him more than he cared to admit. Morgan noticed his fatigue. Tom, you need rest. Let Davis handle things for a while. Walker shook his head. There's still work to be done. The program manual needs to be finalized. The next class selection needs to be overseen. Davis can handle it, Morgan interrupted gently. That's why you chose him. Remember to carry on when you couldn't. Walker looked out the window at Davis, who was engaged in animated conversation with the students, pointing out nuances in their performance, offering encouragement and guidance with the natural authority of a born leader. He's ready, Walker admitted. Has been for a while now. You just hate letting go, Morgan finished for him. I know. But you've given them everything they need. It's time to trust them to carry it forward. Walker nodded slowly. Perhaps you're right. 2 weeks later, a small ceremony was held at the Phoenix facility. The graduating class stood at attention as General Morgan presented them with their official certification. The Secretary of Defense had flown in specifically for the occasion, a testament to the importance the Pentagon placed on the program. After the certificates were presented, the Secretary stepped to the podium. Today marks not just the graduation of our 3rd class of Phoenix snipers, but also a transition in leadership. Lieutenant Colonel Thomas Walker, who has been the guiding force behind this revolutionary program, will be stepping into a consulting role. A murmur ran through the audience. Walker, standing off to the side, maintained his composure, though those who knew him well could see the mixture of emotions behind his stoic exterior. Taking over as program director, the secretary continued, will be Sergeant Ryan Davis, recently promoted to lieutenant for his exceptional service. Lieutenant Davis has worked alongside Colonel Walker from the program's inception and has demonstrated not only a complete mastery of the Phoenix methodology, but also the leadership qualities needed to guide this program into the future. Davis stepped forward, accepting the ceremonial passing of command with appropriate gravity. When he reached the podium, he took a moment to collect himself before speaking. 6 months ago, I stood on a firing range and mocked an old man with an orange rifle. He began his honesty, drawing a ripple of surprised laughter from the audience. It was the biggest mistake of my career and also the most fortunate, because that mistake led me here to the most profound learning experience of my life. Davis looked directly at Walker. Colonel Walker taught me that true mastery comes not from equipment or calculations or even natural talent. It comes from understanding that we are part of the world we operate in, not separate from it. That a bullet's path is influenced by everything it encounters, just as our lives are shaped by every experience and every person we meet. He gestured to the graduating class. What you've learned here goes beyond marksmanship. You've learned a philosophy, an approach to your craft that transcends conventional limitations. Carry that with you and honor the man who made it possible. The ceremony concluded with a standing ovation for Walker, who accepted the recognition with characteristic humility. As the crowd dispersed, he found himself alone with Davis near the replica workshop where they had spent so many hours. You'll do well, Walker said simply. Better than I could have. Davis shook his head. I'll never match what you've accomplished. You don't need to match it, Walker replied. You need to exceed it. That's how knowledge grows, how skills evolve. Each generation building on the foundation left by the one before. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small object. The orange poker chip he had carried through countless missions. I want you to have this, he said, pressing it into Davis's palm. Davis looked at the worn chip, understanding its significance. Sir, I can't. You can and you will, Walker insisted gently. It's been my reminder for decades. Now it's yours. A reminder of what we stand for, of the responsibility we carry. Davis closed his fingers around the chip, nodding his acceptance of both the gift and the burden it represented. What will you do now? He asked. Walker smiled, looking out at the desert landscape he had come to love. I have a cabin in the mountains of Montana. Been neglecting it for too long. Thought I might spend some time there, maybe write down some of the things I never included in the official manuals. The World According to Thomas Walker, Davis said with a smile. I'd read that. You might be the only one, Walker chuckled. But there are things worth preserving, stories worth telling. Not for glory or recognition, but so that the lessons aren't lost. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, mentor and student, now colleagues, perhaps even friends. The orange rifles, Davis said finally, will continue the tradition. Walker nodded. Good. Never let them forget what they represent. 1 month later, Walker sat on the porch of his Montana cabin, watching a summer storm roll across the valley below. The mountain air was crisp and clean, a world away from the desert heat of Fort Irwin. Hellfire Orange rested on a rack inside, meticulously maintained, but no longer carried into the field. A vehicle approached up the long driveway, unusual enough to draw Walker's attention. He recognized the government plates on the SUV as it came to a stop before his cabin. General Morgan stepped out now, wearing civilian clothes rather than her uniform. Behind her came Davis, also in civilian attire. Quite a drive to make an old man feel important, Walker called out as they approached the porch. Morgan smiled. We were in the neighborhood, if you consider Montana the neighborhood when coming from D.C. Walker gestured to the chairs on the porch. To what do I owe the pleasure? Davis carried a long case which he set carefully on the porch. We have something for you, sir. Walker raised an eyebrow. I'm retired lieutenant. No more sir necessary. Some habits die hard, Davis replied with a smile. Besides, I think you've earned it for life. Morgan nodded to the case. Open it. Walker unlatched the case, revealing a rifle unlike any he had seen before. It retained the distinctive orange coloration of his own Hellfire, but the design was more refined, the materials more advanced. Etched into the receiver was a simple inscription, To the Desert Phantom. The legacy continues. The first production model of the XM25 Phoenix, Davis explained. Based on your original design but incorporating some of the refinements we've developed. The Secretary of Defense approved a limited production run for Phoenix program graduates. Walker lifted the rifle reverently, feeling its perfect balance, noting the innovations while recognizing the core principles of his original design. We wanted you to have the first one, Morgan said. Serial number 0001. Walker was momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence for a man who had always known precisely what to say in any situation. I don't know what to say, he admitted finally. You don't need to say anything, Davis replied. Just know that your work continues. The program is thriving. The methodology is being refined and expanded, and every graduate carries a piece of your legacy with them. Morgan pulled a folder from her bag. There's more. The first field reports from Phoenix graduates deployed in active zones. Walker opened the folder, reading through the reports with growing satisfaction. Shots that had saved hostages, that had prevented ambushes, that had extracted stranded teams from impossible situations. Each one a testament to the program's success, to the value of what he had built. They're doing good work, he said, simply closing the folder. The best, Morgan agreed. And it's just the beginning. They spent the remainder of the day sharing stories, discussing the program's future, and enjoying the simple pleasure of friendship forged through shared purpose. As evening fell, they moved inside, where Walker showed them the manuscript he had been working on. Not a technical manual, but a memoir of sorts, capturing the philosophy behind the methodology in ways that formal documents never could. This is important, Davis said, paging through the handwritten phone notes. This captures the heart of what you taught us, not just the techniques. Walker nodded. The techniques will evolve. They should, but the core principles, those need to be preserved. As night descended on the mountains, Morgan and Davis prepared to leave, the long drive back to civilization awaiting them. At the door, Walker embraced each of them in turn. Take care of them, he said to Davis. The students, the program, remember what it's all about. I will, Davis promised, and I'll be back for more of your wisdom when you least expect it. Walker smiled. I'll be here. The door is always open. After their departure, Walker returned to his porch watching their taillights disappear down the mountain road. He felt a profound sense of completion of a circle closed. The young hotshot who had mocked his orange rifle had become the carrier of his legacy, the guardian of his methodology. He thought back to that day on the range to the moment Davis had first laid eyes on Hellfire Orange. How far they had both come since then. The student had become a master in his own right, and the teacher had found something he had never expected, the satisfaction of passing on knowledge that might otherwise have died with him. Inside the new orange rifle gleamed in the firelight, a bridge between past and future. Walker knew he would probably never fire it in combat, never test its capabilities in the field. His days of impossible shots and covert operations were behind him. But others would carry on that work armed not just with superior weapons, but with the understanding that had taken him a lifetime to develop. The understanding that true mastery comes not from dominating the environment, but from becoming one with it, from seeing patterns, where others see only chaos, from finding harmony in the midst of complexity. 6 months later, a small package arrived at Walker's own cabin. Inside was a simple wooden plaque bearing a photograph and an engraved plate. The photograph showed the first full class to graduate under Davis's leadership, 24 snipers from all branches of service, each holding their orange rifles with pride. The inscription read, "The Desert Phantom Legacy Class. May we honor your teachings through our actions." Walker hung the plaque above the fireplace alongside his few military decorations and the faded photograph of himself and a young Lieutenant Morgan in the Saudi desert so many years ago. That evening, as snow began to fall outside his window, Walker sat at his desk and continued writing his memoir. Not for fame or recognition, but to ensure that the deeper wisdom behind the orange rifle would never be lost. He wrote of the desert winds and mountain storms, of the rhythm of breath and heartbeat, of the dance between shooter and environment. He wrote of responsibility and purpose, of the sacred trust that comes with the power to take a life or save one from an impossible distance. And he wrote of a young SEAL named Ryan Davis, who had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength lies not in being the best, but in having the humility to learn from others, the wisdom to question one's assumptions, and the courage to pass on what you have learned. As winter settled over the mountains, news occasionally reached Walker of the Phoenix program's successes. Rescue operations made possible by shots that defied conventional ballistics. Hostage situations resolved without civilian casualties. Special operations teams extracted from impossible situations thanks to precision, fire from distances once considered beyond human capability. Each report brought a quiet satisfaction, not pride in his own accomplishments, but joy in knowing that his work continued through others, that the orange rifles were fulfilling their true purpose, not dealing death, but preserving life. In the spring, as the mountain snows began to melt, Walker received an unexpected visitor. A military helicopter landed in the clearing near his cabin, and out stepped Davis, now wearing the oak leaves of a major on his uniform. "Promotion looks good on you," Walker called out as Davis approached the porch. Davis smiled. "Still feels strange. Not as strange as being called sir by men twice my age, though." "You'll get used to it," Walker assured him, gesturing to a chair. "What brings you all the way to Montana? Surely not just to show off your new rank." Davis sat, his expression turning serious. "I need your help, sir. One last mission." Walker raised an eyebrow. "I'm 83 years old, Major. My mission days are long behind me." "Not as a shooter," Davis clarified. "As an advisor. We have a situation that, well, it's right up your alley. Impossible shot, high stakes, unconventional environment." Walker leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued despite himself. "Go on." Davis outlined the scenario: a hostage situation in a remote mountain region, multiple barriers to clear shooting, extreme distance, unpredictable weather patterns. The kind of scenario that conventional sniping methodology would deem impossible. "We have 3 Phoenix graduates on site," Davis explained. "All excellent, but they're facing variables they've never encountered before, combinations of factors that even our training didn't cover." Walker nodded slowly. "And you think I might have insights?" "I know you do," Davis replied, "because you wrote about almost this exact scenario in your journal, the one you showed me last time I was here." Walker smiled. "You were paying attention." Always, Davis said simply. Walker rose from his chair. Let me get my notes and the weather charts for that region. We'll need to factor in the seasonal patterns, the daily thermal cycles. Together, they spent the day analyzing the scenario, developing a solution that combined Walker's intuitive methodology with Davis's more structured approach. By evening, they had crafted a plan that accounted for the complex variables at play. Davis transmitted the solution to the field team, then settled in to wait for word of the outcome. They're good men, Walker said as they sat by the fire. They'll make it work. Davis nodded. Because they had a good teacher. Two, actually. The call came near midnight. Mission successful, hostages rescued, no casualties. The shot that made it possible had been taken from a distance that would have been considered beyond the realm of possibility just a year earlier. Davis relayed the news to Walker, who received it with quiet satisfaction. Good, he said simply. That's what it's all about. As Davis prepared to leave the next morning, Walker walked with him to the helicopter. You don't need me anymore, you know, he said. You and your team have taken what I taught you and improved upon it. As it should be. Davis shook his head. We'll always need you, sir. Not for the technical details or the calculations, but for the perspective, the philosophy behind it all. Walker smiled. Well, you know where to find me. The door is always open. They shook hands, the student now, a leader in his own right, the teacher now, an advisor rather than a director. Each man transformed by their unlikely partnership, by the journey that had begun with mockery and ended with mutual respect. As the helicopter lifted off, Walker raised a hand in farewell, then turned back toward his cabin. Inside, the orange rifle gleamed in the morning light, a reminder of battles fought, lives saved, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. He sat at his desk and opened his journal, continuing the work of recording his lifetime of experience. Not for glory or recognition, but to ensure that the wisdom behind the orange rifle would be preserved for those who would come after, for those who would push the boundaries even further, who would redefine what was possible. In firing ranges across the country, orange rifles now appeared with increasing frequency, no longer objects of mockery, but symbols of the elite Phoenix program. Each one a testament to a philosophy that transcended conventional limitations, that saw harmony where others saw only chaos, that found possibility in the face of the impossible. And in a mountain cabin in Montana, the original Desert Phantom continued his quiet work, secure in the knowledge that his legacy was in good hands. The orange rifle had found its proper home in the world, not as a curiosity or a legend, but as a symbol of a deeper truth, that true mastery comes not from dominance, but from understanding, not from force, but from harmony, not from pride, but from humility. The legacy of Thomas Walker and his orange rifle would continue long after he was gone, carried forward by those who understood that the color of a weapon doesn't determine its effectiveness. The person holding it does. And more importantly, the purpose behind each shot. The orange rifles, Davis said finally, will continue the tradition. Walker nodded. Good. Never let them forget what they represent. 1 month later, Walker sat on the porch of his Montana cabin, watching a summer storm roll across the valley below. The mountain air was crisp and clean, a world away from the desert heat of Fort Irwin. Hellfire Orange rested on a rack inside, meticulously maintained, but no longer carried into the field. A vehicle approached up the long driveway, unusual enough to draw Walker's attention. He recognized the government plates on the SUV as it came to a stop before his cabin. General Morgan stepped out now, wearing civilian clothes rather than her uniform. Behind her came Davis, also in civilian attire. Quite a drive to make an old man feel important, Walker called out as they approached the porch. Morgan smiled. We were in the neighborhood, if you consider Montana the neighborhood when coming from D.C. Walker gestured to the chairs on the porch. To what do I owe the pleasure? Davis carried a long case which he set carefully on the porch. We have something for you, sir. Walker raised an eyebrow. I'm retired lieutenant. No more sir necessary. Some habits die hard, Davis replied with a smile. Besides, I think you've earned it for life. Morgan nodded to the case. Open it. Walker unlatched the case, revealing a rifle unlike any he had seen before. It retained the distinctive orange coloration of his own Hellfire, but the design was more refined, the materials more advanced. Etched into the receiver was a simple inscription, To the Desert Phantom, the legacy continues. The first production model of the XM-25 Phoenix, Davis explained, based on your original design but incorporating some of the refinements we've developed. The Secretary of Defense approved a limited production run for Phoenix program graduates. Walker lifted the rifle reverently, feeling its perfect balance, noting the innovations while recognizing the core principles of his original design. "We wanted you to have the first one," Morgan said. "Serial number 001. Walker was momentarily speechless, a rare occurrence for a man who had always known precisely what to say in any situation. "I don't know what to say, ma'am," he admitted finally. "You don't need to say anything," Davis replied. "Just know that your work continues. The program is thriving, the methodology is being refined and expanded, and every graduate carries a piece of your legacy with them." Morgan pulled a folder from her bag. "There's more. The first field reports from Phoenix graduates deployed in active zones." Walker opened the folder, reading through the reports with growing satisfaction. Shots that had saved hostages, that had prevented ambushes, that had extracted stranded teams from impossible situations. Each one a testament to the program's success, to the value of what he had built. "They're doing good work," he said, simply closing the folder. "The best?" Morgan agreed. "And it's just the beginning." They spent the remainder of the day sharing stories, discussing the program's future, and enjoying the simple pleasure of friendship forged through shared purpose. As evening fell, they moved inside, where Walker showed them the manuscript he had been working on. Not a technical manual, but a memoir of sorts, capturing the philosophy behind the methodology in ways that formal documents never could. "This is important," Davis said, paging through the handwritten notes. "This captures the heart of what you taught us, not just the techniques." Walker nodded. "The techniques will evolve. They should. But the core principles, those need to be preserved." As night descended on the mountains, Morgan and Davis prepared to leave the long drive back to civilization awaiting them. At the door, Walker embraced each of them in turn. "Take care of them," he said to Davis. "The students, the program. Remember what it's all about." "I will," Davis promised, "and I'll be back for more of your wisdom when you least expect it." Walker smiled. "I'll be here. The door's always open." After their departure, Walker returned to his porch, watching their taillights disappear down the mountain road. He felt a profound sense of completion, of a circle closed. The young hotshot who had mocked his orange rifle had become the carrier of his legacy, the guardian of his methodology. He thought back to that day on the range, to the moment Davis had first laid eyes on Hellfire Orange. How far they had both come since then. The student had become a master in his own right, and the teacher had found something he had never expected: the satisfaction of passing on knowledge that might otherwise have died with him. Inside, the new orange rifle gleamed in the firelight, a bridge between past and future. Walker knew he would probably never fire it in combat, never test its capabilities in the field. His days of impossible shots and covert operations were behind him. But others would carry on that work, armed not just with superior weapons, but with the understanding that had taken him a lifetime to develop. The understanding that true mastery comes not from dominating the environment, but from becoming one with it, from seeing the patterns where others see only chaos, from finding harmony in the midst of complexity. 6 months later, a small package arrived at Walker's cabin. Inside was a simple wooden plaque bearing a photograph and an engraved plate. The photograph showed the first full class to graduate under Davis's leadership, 24 snipers from all branches of service, each holding their orange rifles with pride. The inscription read, "The Desert Phantom Legacy Class, may we honor your teachings through our actions." Walker hung the plaque above the fireplace alongside his few military decorations, in the faded photograph of himself and a young Lieutenant Morgan in the Saudi desert so many years ago. That evening, as snow began to fall outside his window, Walker sat at his desk and continued writing his memoir. Not for fame or recognition, but to ensure that the deeper wisdom behind the orange rifle would never be lost. He wrote of the desert winds and mountain storms, of the rhythm of breath and heartbeat, of the dance between shooter and environment. He wrote of responsibility and purpose, of the sacred trust that comes with the power to take a life or save one from an impossible distance. And he wrote of a young SEAL named Ryan Davis who had learned the most important lesson of all, that true strength lies not in being the best, but in having the humility to learn from others, the wisdom to question one's assumptions, and the courage to pass on what you have learned. As winter settled over the mountains, news occasionally reached Walker of the Phoenix program's successes. Rescue operations made possible by shots that defied conventional ballistics. Hostage situations resolved without civilian casualties. Special operations teams extracted from impossible situations thanks to precision fire from distances once considered beyond human capability. Each report brought a quiet satisfaction, not pride in his own accomplishments, but joy in knowing that his work continued through others, that the Orange Rifles were fulfilling their true purpose, not dealing death, but preserving life. In the spring, as the mountain snows began to melt, Walker received an unexpected visitor. A military helicopter landed in the clearing near his cabin, and out stepped Davis, now wearing the oak leaves of a major on his uniform. "Promotion looks good on you," Walker called out as Davis approached the porch. Davis smiled. "Still feels strange. Not as strange as being called sir by men twice my age, though." "You'll get used to it," Walker assured him, gesturing to a chair. "What brings you all the way to Montana? Surely not just to show off your new rank." Davis sat his expression, turning serious. "I need your help, sir. One last mission." Walker raised an eyebrow. "I'm 83 years old, Major. My mission days are long behind me." "Not as a shooter," Davis clarified. "As an advisor. We have a situation that, well, it's right up your alley. Impossible shot, high stakes, unconventional environment." Walker leaned forward slightly, his interest piqued despite himself. "Go on." Davis outlined the scenario. A hostage situation in a remote mountain region. Multiple barriers to clear shooting, extreme distance, unpredictable weather patterns. The kind of scenario that conventional sniping methodology would deem impossible. "We have 3 Phoenix graduates on site," Davis explained. "All excellent, but they're facing variables they've never encountered before, combinations of factors that even our training didn't cover." Walker nodded slowly. "And you think I might have insights?" "I know you do," Davis replied, "because you wrote about almost this exact scenario in your journal, the one you showed me last time I was here." Walker smiled. "You were paying attention." "Always," Davis said simply. Walker rose from his chair. "Let me get my notes and the weather charts for that region. We'll need to factor in the seasonal patterns, the daily thermal cycles." Together, they spent the day analyzing the scenario, developing a solution that combined Walker's intuitive methodology with Davis's more structured approach. By evening, they had crafted a plan that accounted for the complex variables at play. Davis transmitted the solution to the field team, then settled in to wait for word of the outcome. "They're good men," Walker said as they sat by the fire. "They'll make it work." Davis nodded, "because they had a good teacher. 2, actually." The call came near midnight. Mission successful, hostages rescued, no casualties. The shot that made it possible had been taken from a distance that would have been considered beyond the realm of possibility just a year earlier. Davis relayed the news to Walker, who received it with quiet satisfaction. "Good," he said simply. "That's what it's all about." As Davis prepared to leave the next morning, Walker walked with him to the helicopter. "You don't need me anymore, you know," he said. "You and your team have taken what I taught you and improved upon it, as it should be." Davis shook his head. "We'll always need you, sir. Not for the technical details or the calculations, but for the perspective, the philosophy behind it all." Walker smiled. "Well, you know where to find me. The door's always open." They shook hands, the student now a leader in his own right, the teacher now an advisor rather than a director. Each man transformed by their unlikely partnership, by the journey that had begun with mockery and ended with mutual respect. As the helicopter lifted off, Walker raised a hand in farewell, then turned back toward his cabin. Inside, the Orange Rifle gleamed in the morning light, a reminder of battles fought, lives saved, and knowledge passed from one generation to the next. He sat at his desk and opened his journal, continuing the work of recording his lifetime of experience. Not for glory or recognition, but to ensure that the wisdom behind the Orange Rifle would be preserved for those who would come after, for those who would push the boundaries even further, who would redefine what was possible. In firing ranges across the country, Orange Rifles now appeared with increasing frequency, no longer objects of mockery, but symbols of the elite Phoenix program. Each one a testament to a philosophy that transcended conventional limitations, that saw harmony where others saw only chaos, that found possibility in the face of the impossible. And in a mountain cabin in Montana, the original Desert Phantom continued his quiet work, secure in the knowledge that his legacy was in good hands. The orange rifle had found its proper home in the world, not as a curiosity or a legend, but as a symbol of a deeper truth that true mastery comes not from dominance, but from understanding, not from force, but from harmony, not from pride, but from humility. The legacy of Thomas Walker and his orange rifle would continue long after he was gone, carried forward by those who understood that the color of a weapon doesn't determine its effectiveness. The person holding it does. And more importantly, the purpose behind each shot.